Welcome to the Compliance Officer's Playbook podcast. We are launching into a deep dive today that really cuts right to the heart of organizational resilience. We're not talking about compliance as, a necessary evil, but as the engine of trust and the foundation for real growth.
That's absolutely right. I mean, for those of you listening, managing risk, prepping for audits, or just trying to build a resilient organization, this is crucial. We're unpacking a core paradox today.
And what's that?
Compliance rarely collapses in one big, dramatic, front-page moment. It fails quietly. It's built up through the accumulation of tiny, almost imperceptible compromises that, over time, they just become the norm.
That concept of quiet failure is exactly what drew us into this. It's fascinating. So our mission today is to synthesize these sources and really understand two critical things. First, we need to map the anatomy of that quiet failure, how minor shortcuts can, snowball into major institutional risk.
And second,
how we can intentionally reverse that process, how to build a proactive, integrated compliance culture day by day.
let's do it.
So let's start with a foundational reframing, one that really challenges that C-suite perspective. The common misconception is that compliance is the brake pedal.
Right. It slows down innovation, adds friction to sales.
Exactly. It complicates things. It's seen as purely reactive.
And this research argues the complete opposite. It's a powerful argument. Effective compliance creates the guardrails. That's the metaphor they use.
Guardrails. I like that.
It allows organizations to grow safely, sustainably, and critically with integrity. It is not a barrier to innovation. It's actually a catalyst for resilience because it defines the safe space where creativity can thrive.
I appreciate that shift in metaphor because it totally changes how you think about allocating resources. If you think about driving a high-performance car, you can only go fast if you trust the guardrails on the turns, right?
Precisely.
If that compliance structure is robust, leadership can be more aggressive with their business strategy because they know the boundaries are secure.
Exactly. And that structural confidence, it translates directly into speed in other areas.
Like what?
Faster M&A integration, quicker market entry for new products, higher investor trust, which, directly reduces the cost of capital.
But for those guardrails to hold up, they have to be a shared responsibility.
Yes.
Not just something IT or the legal department worries about. And that's often where the friction starts. So how do you get past that mindset of it just being a box-ticking exercise?
Well, the sources really emphasize that it starts with communication, making the why crystal clear. If a frontline team just thinks they're checking a box for some corporate report, assurance is going to be low. It just will be.
But if they understand how it protects them.
Yes. If they understand that the control protects them from personal liability or protects the company's reputation, which, drives their bonuses, then the whole dynamic shifts. It means you have to integrate risk awareness into performance metrics, not just have it siloed away.
That makes sense. It becomes part of the operational review for every single department.
From marketing all the way to the supply chain.
So that focus on behavior brings us right to the mechanics of failure. If compliance isn't failing loudly, how does this silent build of risk actually happen? Let's get into that accumulation effect.
This is where we see the erosion of controls, and it happens one decision at a time. The sources, they give this vivid and frankly very recognizable list of these little ignored actions.
I think we can all picture this.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the compliance associate. They're swamped with 50 due diligence cases, and they say, you know what? Skip this case. The queue is long.
Or the legal team deciding, we'll document this exception later when things calm down.
Which they never do.
Never. And what about the most insidious one, the just this once? That phrase is a compliance death sentence, isn't it?
It really is. Because the moment you justify that one exception, you have fundamentally undermined the entire policy.
And what happens then?
Well, what often happens is that these minor compromises, they start to pair up with larger structural red flags that everyone is ignoring. Beautifully written policies that nobody actually follows.
Right. Or red flags that pop up in the system that no one reports because the escalation process is just too complicated.
The silent failure isn't the action itself. It's the institutional normalization of the deviation. That's the key.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Months, maybe years later. And this is the moment that quiet failure becomes deafeningly loud.
The moment of truth.
A fraud slips through,
Yeah.
or an external regulator comes asking for an explanation about a decision made 18 months ago. And that tiny forgotten oversight suddenly blows up into a major crisis.
And here is the critical finding. This really matters for every compliance officer listening. The consequences become severe, not primarily because of the original error, which might have been a minor lapse in judgment. They become devastating because the organization lacks the documentation to justify its decisions when the regulators show up.
Okay, so why is that lack of documentation so damning? Is it just about proof, or is there something deeper legally?
It fundamentally changes the regulatory view of the event. It's a game changer. If you can show clear documentation, a defined policy, and a reasoned justification for an exception, even if that decision turned out to be a mistake, it often suggests an error in judgment.
Okay, an honest mistake.
Right. But the absence of documentation suggests a deeper systemic failure of internal control. Or worse, a lack of any intent to comply in the first place. It just shifts the burden of proof onto the company in the worst possible way.
So it moves the conversation from mistake to institutional negligence.
Precisely. The regulator isn't just looking at what happened, but whether the firm had controls and, crucially, whether it followed them.
If you can't show the why, the error is presumed to be part of an unchecked risk-taking culture.
Exactly. It turns a localized error into a systemic cultural problem in the eyes of the authorities. That's what really compounds the penalty.
That devastating documentation gap, it connects directly to a core weakness identified in the sources, which is that compliance controls fail when they are just bolted onto operations instead of being fully integrated.
The bolted-on problem. It's the absolute enemy of adherence. This is when, say, a control requires a sales team member to stop what they're doing, jump to a totally separate system for a check.
Ugh, I can feel the friction already.
Right. Then they have to manually log the result back into their CRM, and the material explains exactly why this fails. If the control creates friction, or if the training feels irrelevant to their specific job.
Like training on export controls for someone who only deals with local marketing.
Perfect example. Adherence just drops off a cliff. Instantly.
I can absolutely relate to seeing compliance as an obstacle if it means logging out of my main work tool. The sources say true compliance culture has to reverse that friction. But practically, for the officers listening, what does successful integration actually look like on the ground?
It means moving the controls into the software that people are already using. It's embedding accountability into their everyday workflows.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Instead of another mandatory training on a new sanctions policy, the shipping software itself just throws up a hard stop when a restricted address is entered.
Ah, so the system does the work.
The control becomes intuitive. It makes the right action the easiest one and the wrong action impossible, or at least very, very difficult.
But that kind of integration has to be expensive, right? Especially in large companies with legacy systems.
It is. That's the strategic challenge. The sources acknowledge it's a significant investment, but they frame it as shifting your cost from remediation, which is hugely expensive, to prevention.
A proactive spend instead of a reactive one.
That's it. And organizations that do this well, they start small. They focus on high-risk, high-volume processes first.
Like customer onboarding.
Customer onboarding, transaction monitoring, things like that. They work side by side with the business units to redesign the process flow, not just tack a checklist onto a broken process. And to stop those small compromises from building up again, the sources stress the need for continuous visibility.
So no more slow, sporadic annual certifications.
Exactly. Those are just a snapshot in time. We can't rely on them anymore.
There's that excellent analogy in the material about monitoring risk drift.
I love that term.
We're all familiar with code drift in software, where the code slowly deviates from its baseline. This is the same idea for operational risk.
It is. And to detect that drift, you're looking for behavioral anomalies. Things that signal a policy deviation before it results in a failure.
So instead of just auditing if a control was in place last year,
You're monitoring if people are still adhering to it, today, daily. It means analyzing logs, transaction patterns, even the time it takes to approve decisions, a sudden spike in undocumented exceptions. That's risk drift.
and without that kind of ongoing insight, those quiet failures just stay invisible.
They fester until they evolve from isolated compromises into systemic institutional weaknesses.
The kind that require those massive, disruptive, and incredibly expensive remediation programs?
Which is where technology really steps in as the primary preventative measure. The material highlights how automated tools are fundamentally changing the job of a compliance professional from, say, a checker to a strategist.
Okay, so what are the key tech roles here? We mentioned automated verification tools, continuous monitoring.
Yes, the role of technology is just growing dramatically. Automated verification can check if a supplier's documents are authentic, instantaneously. It removes human judgment from those high-risk validation tasks.
And smarter onboarding.
Smarter onboarding processes use tech to segment risk immediately, tailoring the level of due diligence required so resources aren't wasted on low-risk profiles. And those continuous monitoring systems, they give us that critical ability to detect anomalies early. It reduces our dependency on manual checks, which are, well, they're prone to human error.
And bias, and just getting overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it all.
All of the above.
So the core benefit here is consistency, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolute consistency. Automation helps institutionalize the right behavior and ensures rules are applied uniformly no matter who is doing the task.
And it creates the audit trail.
And perhaps most importantly, yes, these systems create that documented audit trail for every single action and exception, solving that core documentation failure we talked about before a regulator even needs to ask.
Let's bring this full circle, because I think this is the most empowering takeaway for our listeners.
Yeah.
We started with this dual reality that compliance failure is built quietly, day by day, through ignored compromises. But the sources give us this powerful flip side. A strong compliance culture is built the exact same way.
It's the accumulation of positive, intentional actions. It's all about the intentional reinforcement of integrity. And this isn't about some huge annual campaign. It's about micro actions.
And those positive actions are basically the mirror image of the quiet failures.
Sure. Yeah.
Simple things like making sure processes are clear and accessible, fostering teams that feel safe enough to speak up when they spot a red flag.
Instead of feeling pressure to stay quiet to meet a deadline, yes. And it's ensuring leaders set the tone. Leaders who genuinely show that they will not trade speed for risk, even when the pressure is immense. But the most crucial action happens at the individual level.
The person clicking approve.
The person who pauses for 30 seconds to ask that one critical question, is this fully compliant and documented, before they click approve on a transaction or a decision?
When you look at it that way, through the lens of accumulated positive actions, the whole compliance framework just transforms. It stops being paperwork and becomes one of the company's most valuable assets.
It protects the license to operate, the reputation, and the long-term capacity to scale in a safe, sustainable way.
It's the foundation.
Ultimately, the difference between quiet failure and quiet success is just whether those small, high-integrity actions are ignored or intentionally reinforced. That daily accumulation of good decisions is the resilient foundation. So, as you reflect on this deep dive into the architecture of resilience, maybe consider this final thought to mull over. If compliance culture is built by the accumulation of small, intentional, positive actions, what specific small, positive compliance action will you intentionally reinforce in your workflow today, and how will you make it visible to others?
That is a fantastic, practical question to leave us with. We hope this deep dive has given you a blueprint for actively building resilience rather than just passively avoiding risk. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you liked the content and found this synthesis of complex risk management strategies valuable, please subscribe to ensure you don't miss our next analysis. And if you love this show and want to continue to get cutting-edge analysis and insights like this, we invite you to become a paid subscriber today for $5 USD, and get full access to all premium episodes packed with insights, stories, and value you won't find anywhere else. The link is in the show notes.